All right, BARDA's overall strategy uses, as you've heard multiple times this morning, innovative approaches from new partnering opportunities to the incorporation of new technologies into medical countermeasures to address competing demands and support long-term preparedness and response efforts. BARDA's Director of Medical Countermeasures Programs, Dr. Robert Johnson, is here to explain in detail and share more information about how we use innovation and incorporate it into our efforts and upcoming initiatives, including Project Next Gen. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Robert Johnson.
Late morning talks, always difficult. All of the good comments about welcoming, thank you so much for being here, have been taken. All that I'm left with is the comment that I'm the last talk between you and lunch. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Today what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes with you laying out some of the common themes that you'll hear on the stage later today, throughout the day today, in the smaller breakout sessions, as well as the one-on-one networking sessions that are so important to BARDA Industry Days. So BARDA supports advanced research and development in the medical countermeasure space. Like most of you that are running companies, whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, NGO, you have to look at your return on investment, right? You look at the risk associated with product development, and you look at if you're successful getting that product to licensure, what's the benefit of that effort? What's the benefit of that product? It's the same situation from the BARDA perspective. We have to think about those risks and benefits and the impact of success. So it's not so much a matter of, is it a great idea? There are lots and lots of great ideas that we receive from all of you every day. Right? It's what's the impact of that great idea if we're successful in taking that product to licensure and successful in scaling up that manufacturing capacity. What is that impact of that product on our ability to be prepared and rapidly respond? Over the last 15 years, a lot of that assessment that BARDA has done has been based on the costs associated with advanced research and development and that scale up of the manufacturing. So what does that look like? What's that cost and what's that risk? Okay. Working with all of you over the last 15 plus years, we've had amazing successes in the number of products that have been improved. But with that is coming a growing challenge, right? And that growing challenge is looking beyond just advanced research and development and looking both at sustainment and improvement of the product over time, as well as our requirements around a response. So I want to touch briefly on each of these just for a minute. So when we think about sustainment, right, it's not just a matter of keeping a facility warm, having a facility that potentially you could put some money into and make a product. It's really about having the capability to turn on the ability to manufacture at a moment's notice and make more product. But equally important, once a product is licensed, we cannot let that product stagnate. We have to continue to think about how do we improve that product over time, right? How do we make it more accessible? How do we make sure that the manufacturing and quality processes are keeping up with the newest innovations so we maintain regulatory and quality compliance? All of these things cost money. And importantly, they go on indefinitely. Right. Third, response. So when you look at where BARDA is today, we are often called upon working again with many of you to actively respond to events not just in the US but globally. Right. Those responses take two forms. One is rapid development of new MCMs, as you saw with COVID-19. The other is taking already approved products and making more of that, as you saw with Mpox. The challenge here, again, from a budgeting and a planning perspective, is there's no way to know when these things are going to hit or how much they cost. In some cases, such as COVID, or the early Ebola outbreaks, we receive supplemental funding. That's great. That allows us to partner with you to do our responses without having to dip into our annual appropriations. Allows us to run both things in parallel. But in other cases, such as the recent Sudan and Marburg outbreaks, as well as the Mpox outbreak, we have to use our annual appropriations to support those efforts. Right? So again, increasing the challenges as we think about how best to move forward in this space. So what is the challenge we are solving? Right? It's not what are we asked to do. We're very aware of what we're asked to do. We have the mandates. We have congressional authority. We have tons of great ideas from all of you, new products, new approaches, new ways to go. So that's not the challenge. The challenge is, what do we do given current constraints? All right. And that's what I want to spend the rest of this talk going over with you today. Really, how are we going to address this challenge? And it comes down to two things: prioritize and innovate. And by innovate, I don't just mean innovation in terms of our products. I mean innovation in how we test those products, how we think about utilization of those products, and importantly, the partnerships that we're going to need if we're going to be successful in this effort. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about prioritization. Again, for those of you that have read our BARDA 2022 through 2026 strategy, nothing on this slide, nothing I'm going to say is anything new. No surprises. It follows that strategic plan that's been laid out. We will continue to prioritize threats with an MTD, since they're the highest national security threats and align with available funding, as well as threats for which we have dedicated funding. Really important as we think about this funding, the importance of having that alignment. Because what we don't want to do is start a program and then not have that ability because of funding constraints to see it through to the end. So we really look at how are we going to be able to align that funding. Second, something that we have been emphasizing a lot over the last 5 years, I think you will see a continued, perhaps a little bit more of an emphasis, is threat agnostic capabilities and platform capabilities. Okay. Why is that? When we think about the requirement to respond, we simply have no idea which threat is going to come to the top and cause that next outbreak, be that next terrorist weapon. And it's impossible for us to develop an MCM for every possible known threat, let alone those that we don't know about today that we're going to know about in 6 months down the road. So the requirement is really around threat agnostic and having products that we can rapidly pivot to address whatever threat emerges. Finally, we're going to continue to have our focus on taking MCMs to licensure. I want to spend just a moment talking about why that is. It really breaks down to three things: faster response, more confidence, and increased uptake. Right? So before, I and others have talked a lot about the speed of a response when we have a licensed product, okay, from an MCM perspective. We have a licensed product. If it's in the Strategic National Stockpile, those products are shipping out within 24 hours. Okay? But equally important is confidence. Confidence that the product works. So 40% of products fail phase 3 clinical trials. That's really not where I want to be if I'm thinking about pushing out quickly for a response, that high of a failure rate. Taking a product to licensure gives you increased confidence that you know how to use that product, and when it goes out to be used, it's going to be effective. Okay. Third thing is increased uptake. It doesn't matter how effective your product is, how fast you get it out, if people aren't using it. Okay. And we know that people have greater confidence in a product if it's licensed and readily available. So these are the three things that really are foundational for us as we think about moving forward and taking our products to licensure. One final thing on this is that as great as it is to have products that are licensed, it's icing on the cake when we have a product that is out in the community being used in standard healthcare, whether it's at the hospital, at the doctor's office, or with our first responders. Why? Because then everybody is aware of that product. They know how to use that product. It is on the shelf there for that rapid response. There is so much confidence in using that product, and it is so easy to move that forward. So it's not just this idea of sustainment. Clearly, when it's in that public, commercial public health care system, we do have some great advantages of sustainment, but it's also this rapid response, this increased confidence, and this increased uptake. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk some around innovation. So 4 kind of categories that we're looking at here. As I mentioned before, it's not just a matter of innovation in terms of products and what are our product attributes. It's really how do we test those products? How do we think about those products in terms of actual utilization in a response? And then what is the foundational partnering opportunities and structures that's going to allow us to do this? What I'm going to talk about in the next 5 minutes here, there's a lot of challenges. No easy solutions. And it's really going to be about our ability to partner and figure out how to work through these things together. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of these here in the next slides. So first is when we think about product and product attributes. I'm not going to talk through all of these. I just want to touch on a couple of them. So when we think about threat agnostic approaches, as I mentioned before, this is going to be has been and will continue to be an area of emphasis for us. So whether it's treating the symptom rather than the cause for our chemical program, thinking about burn treatments that are effective regardless of the cause of the burn, or threat agnostic or host-directed therapeutics that can be responsive and effective regardless of the infectious diseases. These are just some of the examples. And I also wanted to mention blood products. When we think about blood products, we take a step back, okay? A lot of times you don't think about how instrumental they can be in so many responses across the board, all right? We really need to think about innovative ways to address the blood product challenges we have, both in terms of shortages just on a daily basis, but also the ability to surge in the event of a response. All right, and I will do a quick little plug. BARDA, in collaboration with our DoD colleagues, end of November, is going to have a workshop that's going to start talking about and continuing the next talk around what is the next step in terms of blood product and how do we innovate in this space to address some of these very significant challenges. I also want to highlight here some of the challenges and our work around the manufacturing on demand and smaller footprint. When we think about vaccines, we think about monoclonal antibodies, we think about the facilities, the cost of maintaining and building those facilities and what that looks like. Tremendous opportunity to innovate in this space, to get it down to a more manageable size footprint and something that can give us the yields that we need when we think about monoclonal antibodies and their incredible potential, but yet hindered because of the size of the facility and things such as yield. So how do we begin to address those? And finally, thinking about reducing the number of frequency of a primary dose series for vaccines. Right? I think this is a great example of looking in detail and identifying those one or two things that can really have a huge impact. So we think about primary series, we think about the next coronavirus outbreak that may happen, you needing a 2-dose vaccine to prime. Imagine if we were able to get that down to a 1-dose vaccine. All right. So what do you think about? You think about from the US population perspective, instead of needing 720 million doses in 3 months, that number's down to 360 million. Globally, you drop from needing 16 billion doses down to 8 billion doses. All right, still a huge number, right? But more manageable. More importantly, you think about the time and the effort, the ancillary supplies, the time to make sure people come back for 2 doses, compliance, all of these types of things are impacted with something so simple as potential formulation changes. So the second thing is focus on clinical trials. How do we look to improve clinical trials? How can we get clinical trials so that the demographics of those enrolled represent the demographics of those that we hope will be using the product at the end of the day? One of the things that we're very interested in is moving those clinical trials closer to the volunteers, closer to the patients. Okay? Something I worry a little bit about in this area, though, is that we seem to see a big push about taking our current structures of the more centralized approaches and taking that same approach to a decentralized location, moving it closer to the volunteer. I worry that all that we're doing there is setting up the same structure that we have now, just in a different place. You know, when we think about the sustainment costs and the ability to take full advantage of these more decentralized trials, I'm not sure this is the best approach. So one of the things that we're going to do from a BARDA perspective is really look at these, work with these leaders in the decentralized space to figure out how do they think their trials and their approaches, their structure is best suited to tap in and partner with us to develop the products. We do know there are a couple of things that are going to be very important as we think about this and will also be a focus. The first is around the remote monitoring, physiological monitoring to enable healthcare providers to work closely with those patients without, again, having to bring them necessarily into a central facility. We need to think about self-collection of blood samples. Right? Again, something that's small, but such a huge impact on our ability to truly go remote into somebody's home. With these trials is their ability to collect the samples and the ability to have tests that will work on samples that can be collected. Until we're able to get over this hump, this idea about doing truly remote trials is not going to come to fruition when we think about advanced product development. And finally, thinking about what are the necessary data capture and quality systems to have in place to be able to move this idea forward. Third thing is about improving response and thinking end-to-end. From the BARDA perspective, as we partner with you, work with all of you, we need to be thinking about that end game earlier. Right? We all know how challenging it is. Once you're at your phase 3 or maybe even licensed product, licensed manufacturing process, to take a step back and build in new attributes, new capabilities. All right? So it's important that we start thinking about that earlier. A couple of things that we'll be focusing on as we go forward. One is, as I mentioned before, the earlier passive warnings. So in order for a therapeutic to work, most of them have to be given as early as possible. We're still too late in getting people to test. All right? You come home from your son or daughter's soccer game, you've got a headache. You don't know if it's because you've been exposed to something or it's because the fans next to you that were shouting and screaming for the last 30 minutes. So you wait 5, 6, 7 hours to see if your headache goes away. Right? That is 5, 6, 7 hours that you are not getting treated, and that treatment is not having a chance to work. So we have to have alerts that are going to allow people to go and get that definitive diagnosis earlier. Second, when we think about test to treat, all right, so test to treat made huge advances during COVID-19 in terms of diagnostics in the home, getting treatments to the home, really significant advances. But it also exposed some pretty big challenges in terms of access, and we really need to start thinking about how are we going to address that. So a couple of things is, how can we improve manufacturing processes and underlying technology to ensure that every household can afford to have a diagnostic? How do we handle manufacturing costs and efforts so we can ensure that if you are sick, every household has access to a monoclonal antibody? Monoclonal antibodies we've seen time after time, fantastic when we think about response capabilities, how quickly they can make monoclonal antibodies, their safety profile, right? But where we're faltering is in terms of our ability to make high levels and be able to get them where they are needed quickly. And finally, as mentioned before, under the clinical trial, this ability, this understanding around self-collection of multiple samples. All right? So when we think again about test to treat, the therapeutic comes to your house, you start taking it. Some of these therapeutics, have drug-drug interactions. Really important that we're able to monitor those things. Right now, you have to go somewhere, right? You have to go somewhere to get those blood draws, get that testing done. Think about how much simpler it's going to be if you're going to be able to self-collect that sample and be able to send it off. Think about from a compliance perspective. But also, if you're sick, you're not then out in the community potentially spreading that as you go to get your blood drawn. Okay. Finally, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about partnering opportunities. We're looking at this in terms of 3 things. So first is around partnering approaches to support long-term access to medical countermeasures and medical countermeasure manufacturing capability within available budget. And this is how I define sustainment. Right? We all know how we would sustain a capability if we had unlimited budgets. Right? We've all worked on sustainment and know what this looks like. The challenge is, of course, we don't have unlimited budgets. And so what does that look like? How are we going to solve this problem that, as mentioned earlier, is becoming bigger and bigger over time? So 3 things that we'll look at. The first, leveraging the commercial market, something I already spoke to, but something that I also realize for many of the products we partner with you to develop is not really a viable option. All right. Second thing is looking at the ability to have some shared production and supply chains. So unlike other pharmaceutical companies, as their pipeline grows, their licensed products grow, with a BARDA model right now, we don't see synergy. All right? We don't see our ability to leverage one supply chain, one manufacturing capability, and use that to support another product. So is there an opportunity for us to do something in that space? And finally, we need to understand the cost to maintain the capability. Right? I want to separate this from the per dose price. Certainly per dose price, very, very important. But per dose price is, like I said, very important. But it doesn't matter when my goal is to maintain the capability. Right? We need to understand what is that long-term capability going to look like. And we need to be thinking about this earlier. Right? We can't be at a post-marketing meeting discussing after FDA licensure saying, hey, what does our sustainment cost look like? How are we going to keep this thing going for the next 15 or 20 years? Right? That's too late. Because as I mentioned, when you're that far along, good luck going back and re-engineering all of that. Right? So we need to understand what those sustainment costs are going to be and make conscious decisions up front around what that looks like. Second, new partnering approaches. Joffrey Benford before me spoke, and John Rigg, as well as Tim Belsky, spoke a little bit about some of our new opportunities. There's going to be several other opportunities to cover this later during BARDA Industry Day, so I'm not going to go over that. I am going to talk briefly, though, around long-term partnerships around flexible platforms. So as I mentioned earlier, flexible platforms are going to be, have been and will continue to be a focus for BARDA. But I wanted to define it a little bit because in some situations there's a misconception that it's just a matter of having a product in a vector that can be rapidly switched, or having being able to make a monoclonal in a system that can be rapidly switched. What we're really looking at is access to that underlying capability and technology that will enable a rapid response to a new threat. So I've outlined some of the key terms here. Again, many of our partnerships with all of you have one or more of these attributes. But what we really need to do is as we move forward, be thinking about all of these things up front, make sure we have good alignment on what that looks like. All right. And I'd be remiss in talking about partnerships if I didn't touch upon the global aspect. So many of the products that BARDA partners with all of you to develop certainly have a global application. Unfortunately, from a global perspective, we have the same challenges around sustainment and response that we have for domestic. All right? We have a challenge around budget and being unable to support all of the requirements domestically, let alone globally. So what we'll be doing over the next 12 months is really reaching out to a lot of the potential global partners out there who are struggling with the same things that we're struggling, right? This is not something that's unique to BARDA. All of the R&D funders globally have this same budget struggle. So really reaching out to them to figure out what is their priorities. Because again, it's not, is it a good idea? It's how does this investment, that return on investment, how is that going to play against all of the other investments and all of the other criteria they're working through? So where do we have that alignment? What are they thinking of in terms of funding, and how can we work together to try to solve this problem? All right. So what does this look like when we think about implementation? All right. And so Dr. Disbrow earlier today mentioned Project NextGen. I think all of you are aware of it at this point. This is a joint project primarily led by NIAID within NIH and BARDA, looking at development of next-generation countermeasures for COVID-19. Three main components to this. First is development of next-generation vaccines that work better than the ones that we currently have. Second is around development of therapeutics for those individuals that cannot take or don't respond to vaccines. And then the third is around what we call the enablers. And it's this enabler category that most falls in alignment with how we think about new technologies. So this enabler category is about being better prepared for the next response. Right? How can we make vaccines, make therapeutics faster? How can we make them work better? And very importantly, how can we ensure better access as we go forward? So these are some of the areas that within NextGen, you can see we have at the top there the four categories I talked about: product attributes, testing, thinking end-to-end at the end of the day, as well as partnering opportunities. And you can see here how these things slot in. So as I mentioned, we have already made some certain awards, including a pull mechanism, prize mechanism that I'm looking at alternative delivery. Something that's really important for that mechanism, traditionally we support R&D contracts, right? Which is fantastic, been very successful working with all of you on that. But we also recognize that there are some partners or some potential partners where that approach doesn't work best. And where we might not know how do we want to get to the end, we just know what we need at the end. And so this pull mechanism, where we set out the requirements, is a good approach to bring in new partners and also not dictate how we're going to get to the end. Just say, this is what we want at the end. All right. So finally, some key takeaways. Again, for those of you that have read the BARDA 2022, 2026 strategy, nothing new over what I've gone over these last 15 or 20 minutes, right? So we think about the three things that we're trying to do. Prepare. So we think about it in the context of developing and sustain that budget balancing act. We think about, in terms of a response, being able to pivot existing MCMs quickly and being able to rapidly develop new MCMs using platform technologies. Finally, we think about maximizing uptake. All right, again, something that's so important. Because if we, again, it doesn't matter how good a product works, if we're not getting it to the right place at the right time and people aren't using it. Right, so what are the product access attributes? Making sure that we have that product approval wherever possible, and making sure we can get it as close as possible to the point of need. And finally, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is really going to have to be a true collaboration, a true partnership. These are very, very difficult things to address, and no one group is going to be able to do that. So with that, thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you for joining us at BID over the next day and a half as we work to address some of these challenges. Thank you.